Alright guys, today we are going to talk a little bit about consequences, specifically natural consequences versus logical consequences, and what the difference between those two are. First though, I want to do a quick little review from what we've been talking about the last few days, and that's the difference between guidance, discipline, and punishment. So first is a quick review from yesterday. Remember that guidance is an overarching idea. It's modeling, having conversations, practicing what you preach. Basically, I'm guiding you right now to be a great child development student. I'm not doing anything explicitly, but I'm just guiding you to learn, to get the right practice and all those things that you need. Discipline is intentionally teaching positive behavior. So, for example, you need to know how to study for a test. So I'm going to sit down beside you and I'm going to show you how I study for tests and then have you kind of maybe mirror what I'm doing. It's disciplining you, giving you the discipline and the guidance that you need to learn how to do that. And then punishment is correcting a wrong behavior. So the child has done something wrong and you are going to give them a punishment, give them a consequence for it. When we think about what a consequence is, a lot of times people think it's like a detention or an ISD or spanking in children. But really, by definition, it's just a result of an action or choice. It's not, it could be positive, it could be negative. It's just the result. You choose to skip class, you're going to get an ISD. You choose to run out into the street, you might get hit by a car. It's just the simple result of an action, good or bad. You study for a test, you get an A. That's a consequence. It's a result of an action or a choice. There are two different types of consequences that we're going to look at, and the first is called natural consequence. It's things that happen on its own without a parent intervening. There's no assigned punishment. There is no assigned consequence. It just is like a result of your action. I have a few examples here that we're going to go through to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of what it is. So, for example, if you choose to maybe eat lots of candy, okay, what would some natural consequences be? Well, one might be you get a cavity, you get a stomach ache, you don't eat your dinner. Those are all consequences. Nobody assigned the punishment of giving a cavity. The parent did not give the child a cavity. It's just a natural reaction that might happen if a child were to eat too much candy. If you do your work well and you do it on time when you're at work, a consequence might be that you get a positive reputation, you get a promotion, you get a raise, you get an A if we're talking in school. Nobody made you get that A, you made yourself get the A. It's a natural consequence, a natural reaction that comes from doing your work well and doing it on time. You stay up too late tonight. Consequence would be you fall asleep in class tomorrow. The teacher doesn't make you fall asleep. Your parents don't make you fall asleep. But a natural reaction, a natural consequence is that you fall asleep in class. If you exercise regularly, you go for a run, you go to the gym, and a consequence might be that you have a healthy heart. You might lose weight if that's something that you need to do. It's a consequence. If you drive drunk, possible consequence would be that you hurt someone, you get arrested, maybe you yourself get killed. Those types of things, those are all natural consequences. So you see, with natural consequences, it's just the course of nature. Nobody makes it happen. A child leaves their bike out. If you look at your page, your notes page, the child's behavior, the child leaves their bike on the driveway. The natural consequence, maybe it gets stolen, maybe it gets run over. Nobody intentionally did that. It's just what happens. What I want you to do now is go ahead and pause this presentation, pause it, and I want you to complete that little chart in the middle of the front page where it gives you several different child behaviors, and then I want you to write a potential natural consequence that might come from that based on that. So pause it. Once you've completed that, go ahead and hit play and we'll move on. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and move on with natural consequences, and we have to pose the question, is that always best? Because that would be very easy for a parent to never really have to give consequences, never really have to Do you think just kind of let nature take its course? So is it always best? And the answer is no. There are some times when natural consequences probably should not be used. One example would be if the child is in danger. You see here in the picture, the child is reaching up for a pot of hot water, hot spaghetti sauce, whatever it is. That's dangerous. We don't want to have the mentality of, well, they'll figure it out. They'll learn. They might get third-degree burns, but they'll learn not to do it again. No. We're their parent. We are supposed to protect them. So no, when it's dangerous, don't let them run on the street and say, well, if they get hit by a car, they'll figure it out. No. So we want to protect them from things that could potentially be dangerous. The second time it is not a good idea to to use natural consequences is if the consequence will be delayed over a really long period of time. Natural consequences should never be used if the punishment, the consequence, isn't going to come for a long period of time. For example, you leave their bike out and it rusts. That's going to take a long time for a bike to rust. The child is not going to be able to make the connection between leaving my bike out and rusting as a consequence. So if it's going to be over a long, drawn-out period of time, you don't want to use a natural consequence, because by the time the consequence finally comes to play, the child does not make that connection. The third and final thing, time when you don't want to use natural consequences is if it's going to cause problems for others. So, for example, if backing over your bike damages the car. So you see the bike in the driveway when you're getting ready to leave. You're like, well, he'll learn. It's in my way. I'm going to run over. Well, that's going to mess up your car. So why would you do that? All right. Or you let the kid miss the bus because they're running late. You're like, well, he'll figure it out. He'll get ready on time. But that causes a headache for you, having to get the kids to school at that point. So whenever it causes struggles for somebody else, that's when you really need to really not use natural consequences, which leads us into our next option of consequences, and that's a logical consequence. Okay, a logical consequence is when an adult gets involved in the consequence. They create it, they carry it out, they inflict the punishment, so to speak, for you. So for example, here's one quick example. If a rule in your house is the children must put all the toys back in the toy box when they're finished playing. That's a rule in your house, okay? A logical consequence you could instill when they don't follow through is that all the toys left on the floor get taken away for a week, okay? There's a connection there. You want there to be a connection between the consequence and the rule, or you want to make sure the punishment fits the crime. Okay, so here's a few guidelines you want to make sure to follow to make sure you're creating good, logical consequence. And the first one, it needs to make sense. Okay, for example, the child scribbles all over the wall with crayon. A logical consequence would be making them clean it up, making them get a soapy rag and wash it down. It makes sense. There's a connection. They're washing the wall because they messed up the wall. So it should have a very clear connection and should make sense, which is kind of why spanking and grounding and some of those consequences really don't work, because there's no connection to the crime. Another guideline, shouldn't be too strong or too weak. So if it's a huge infraction, the child sneaks out and you can't get a hold of them for several hours. Obviously, you as a parent are freaking out. That's a really big rule to break. So then that consequence is going to be a lot stronger than if they forgot to take out the trash. So make sure that if it's a small infraction, it's a small consequence. If it's a huge rule that was broken, then it's going to be a much larger consequence. Make sure it's enforceable. It must be something that you have the power to carry through on. So if it's something like, oh, you're not going to be able to eat lunch with that friend anymore because you guys snuck out together, well, you can't enforce that. You're not with them at lunch. So make sure it's something that you have the power and the ability, as well as the willpower. A lot of parents will say you're grounded for 2 weeks, but then they get so sick of their kids and they're, moping around the house that they say, fine, go after a week. Well, then the child just learns that you don't enforce all your punishments. So make sure it's something that you are able and willing to enforce. Okay, our fourth guideline to look at is to be consistent. You should always follow through on what you say, as well as it should relate to previous infractions. So breaking curfew 1 week, it's 2 nights grounded. So you break curfew, you're in 15 minutes late, so you're grounded for 2 nights. Next 2 nights you can't go out. Then the next time it's a full week. Kind of have to be consistent in what you offer. One child gets this punishment and a second child gets a totally different punishment. Yes, children are different, And yes, we do need to take that into consideration, but there still needs to be consistency in the way we create and enforce rules. The last one is they should be agreed to in advance between the parent and the child, as well as both parents. The parent and child should sit down, have a rule and a consequence clearly agreed upon ahead of time. It really prevents, one, the child from breaking the rule, and then if they do, prevents them from arguing about the rule being broken. So for example, I expect you to be in by midnight tonight. If you break it, you will be in for the next week, every night by 8 p.m. So it's very clearly spelled out, this is what I expect. If this doesn't happen, this is what will happen to you. That way, the child hopefully follows through. If they don't, they know exactly what's coming. They said, yes, Mom, I'll be in at midnight. Yes, Dad, I'll be in at midnight. And when they're not, they can't really argue because they agreed to it. There are some advantages to logical consequences over natural consequence. And the first is that, like we just kind of mentioned, the children know what to expect. They know what the consequence will be before they ever commit a crime, so to speak. So before they break that rule, before they cross over that line, they know what to expect. They know what's coming. They know what will happen should they choose to not follow that rule. So it's really important because then the children have a little bit more control and they're more likely to honestly behave and follow and obey the rules. And the second thing is logical consequences follow what the real world is like. Follow real life. You don't get spanked for showing up late to school. You don't get grounded for getting a D on a test. Talk back to your boss, you get fired. Okay, you show up late to school a lot, you get ISD. Those are examples of logical consequences. You speed, you might get a ticket, or you get into a wreck. Those types of things. So there are some advantages. It mirrors more of what the real world is going to do when you step out into the workplace and socially. What I want you to do now, if you missed any of the notes, you should have a completed note guide. If not, you can kind of drag back and find what you missed. But now, in just a few, up at the front of the room, there is a worksheet. One side has several crimes or rules, things that a child has done that deserve a consequence. They deserve punishment. And on one side, it tells you, it says real big at the top, natural, and on one side it says logical. But you're going to complete that, and you're going to draft a natural consequence for that one page. What would a natural consequence? Kind of what you did on the front of your note page. And then on the back side, you're going to be doing the same thing, creating some logical consequences. Remember that there needs to be a connection, it needs to be enforceable, and so forth. When you're finished, that is due today before you leave, so make sure it gets turned into the black tray at the front of the room. If you missed anything, please go back and replay the pieces that you missed and make sure you have a completed note guide and stick this in your notes section, and we will be good to go.